Welcome to Season 2 of Players Only, your backstage pass behind the scenes of today's PC and video game industry. I'm Scott Steinberg, and in the conclusion of our special two-part season opener, our investigation continues into the possible death of gaming as we know it. Join us as we ask, is there still a future for the hobby that so many know and love?
It really is changing. It is changing, and there's two ways you can go. Either you stick your head in the sand and just kind of ignore all this stuff. It's going to go away. It's going to be all right. A bit like the car manufacturers in the US. The other way is, which I call kind of the U2 concept, is U2 moves with the times. If they don't just get old and stale, they keep doing whatever the coolest, latest thing is. What is moving with the times these days? It's taking the time to look at stuff you'd never look at.
That doesn't mean in any way that some of the old platforms, like the consoles or PC or the other big platforms that people are used to developing on and playing games on, are going away. Quite the contrary. I think it's almost like the film industry. The first 50 years was kind of the evolution of the craft and as an art form. And then the last 50 years, up till now, has been sort of a continuation of that, but a much broader form of entertainment, a much more diverse offering. And unlike the film industry, where maybe there's a few different ways you can display movies, but you're getting increasing diversity in how you distribute them. Video games, I think, have even a wider reach because of the platform diversity and just by their nature, they're digital. So that facilitates more people to play and try games and share them with friends than ever before.
It's really hard to predict what's going to happen with the game industry. I mean, what I think most people say is that we're experiencing a bump like everybody else in terms of the recession, but if you look at what most analysts are saying, we should expect continued growth simply because the gaming audience continues to expand. And no small part thanks to the Wii and handhelds and cell phones, which continue to get gaming to people who normally wouldn't play games.
When the Nintendo Wii came out and bowling and all the rest of it, people love to point to that, but there's a lot of other stuff that I think is actually more interesting. There's things like a website called Stardoll, which has 26 million users, all girls. How can they get 26 million girls to do something like that when there's no cinematic, there's no gameplay? What can we learn from that? And social networking, I have a friend with 160 million registered users for a Facebook application he has. And you go, how does that work? How does that social stuff work? How does the needing friends to play a game actually work? That's something that we don't do. We let your friends play with you, but we don't think about, do you need them?
I think game companies are going to need to do more of moving forward. They need to realize that we all don't have hours and hours of time to devote to gaming experiences. And I think they're learning that now. Depending on the type of game, you could get in and play 15 to 30 worthwhile minutes, whether it's a small game or a big game, like a Call of Duty game. It seems like they're designing games so that you could get a 30-minute episode in, so to speak.
Perhaps change is good after all, but does this mean that we're getting back to design for innovation's sake and away from the age of corporate giants?
This is definitely not the end of mega publishers. We're going to see more conglomerates, we're going to see more mergers, we're going to see more acquisitions. And that is just a natural occurrence in any business.
The mega publishers are going to be more important rather than less important in the near term, the next 5 years. And I think that as they overstep their authority and their power, and they exploit the development talent, which really is what makes games great. Ultimately, I think what happens is that the video game business looks an awful lot like the film business, as from the 1940s to the 1970s or 80s, the film business thrived. And then all of a sudden the stars started asking for more than $1 million a picture. They wanted 10, and then they wanted 20, and then they wanted a percentage. And when the studios gave it to them, the studios all crumbled.
I think the big publishers understand that there is a shift of power in some sense to the developer side of things. And you see that with people like Electronic Arts. What they're doing is incredibly smart. Their partners program, they're going out and instead of trying to buy a company or trying to absorb that company, they're saying, why don't you work with us and let us do what we do best in some sense, distribute, do the marketing, get the game out there, and you work on what you do best, which is the creative side of things. Make games that people want to play, and then we'll make sure that they see those games. So the companies that understand that are, I think, going to survive, or at least, I think a lot of companies will survive, but I think they'll thrive in this environment.
I went to the Independent Game Awards, and it was really impressive to see that amount of energy. But the thing that's impressing me now is the level of polish you're seeing. 2 guys working for 3 months, but they're coming out with a really polished product. That this isn't the 20 years ago, this is what games looked like. It's the 6 years ago, this is what games look like. So they're really catching up. A lot of it is tools are improving. So I'm not sure if we should be scared. You know, we're still the blockbuster games, and I'm happy to be in that space.
The big, sort of the Rocket Gibraltar companies, the EA, Activision, I don't see those going anywhere. I think they're just so big that it's really hard for them to topple at this point.
Well, that's kind of reassuring, we think, but when it ultimately comes down to it, we had to ask, what's been killing the business in recent months, and where does tomorrow's industry lie?
We have too many people who have a love of money in our industry. We need more people who have a love of art and who have a love for the act of creating games.
One of the biggest things out of Save Gaming right now is, I think, used games. I think it's taken a huge hit on companies' P&Ls, profits and loss sheets and stuff like that. So I think a huge drop-off in sales for companies.
The game publishers and the retailers there, they should come to some kind of agreement about how to make that happen so it doesn't really hurt the developers. But at the same time, consumers have their own rights, and to pull games out of the reach of many consumers is actually not a good idea.
If I could wave a magic wand and just change one thing about the business, it would just be to make it easier to allow for more innovation. If I could just unleash the creativity that exists in this business but is suppressed by so many of the inherent processes of our business.
I'd like to see us grow over the next 10 years, and I'd like to see us come back to art and come back to great game creation, where the lead designer's creative vision has more weight than it does today.
Actually, I think that's where the game industry is headed. Smaller teams, more indie. They may not get the recognition of some of the bigger games of a Halo or a GTA, but they're still great games, and they keep their teams together, they make money, and they do well for themselves.
We're kind of at that point where, yes, you can continue business as usual. You can keep making retail boxes. You can keep going that way. GameStop is trying to convince people that that's the way it's going to be. But when you look at things like the iPhone coming out with digital distribution, they're going to add microtransactions, and you look what's going on in Asia, you have to ask yourself at some point, am I going to start paying attention, or am I going to avoid it? It's mind wide open right now. We're literally willing to look at anything, consider anything, and try to understand why.
And there you have it. Maybe it's not video games that are dying, but rather just the old ways in which we define them. We'll see you next week on Players Only.